I was seconds away from signing over my $500 million logistics empire to my son. My daughter-in-law Veronica handed me a steaming cup of coffee with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Drink up, Dad," she said sweetly. "It will help you focus." Just as I lifted the mug to my lips, the maid Maria stumbled into me and whispered 4 words that saved my life. "Don't drink. Trust me." I faked a fumble, dropped my pen, and when Veronica bent down to retrieve it, I switched our cups with a sleight of hand I learned decades ago on the road. 5 minutes later, the person writhing on the floor, foaming at the mouth, was not me. Before I tell you how this nightmare unfolded, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to trust a stranger over your own flesh and blood, because sometimes the people who share your last name are the ones holding the knife. Let me take you back to that dining room table exactly 5 minutes before the ambulance sirens started wailing. The air in the room was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table, the same table where I had negotiated deals that turned Blackwood Logistics from a single beat-up delivery truck in 1975 into the national empire it is today. I know how to read a room. I know how to smell fear, and let me tell you, the room smelled like absolute panic. My son Preston sat to my right. He is 40 years old, but in that moment he looked like a terrified child waiting for a beating. He was wearing a $3,000 suit, but he was sweating like a sinner in church. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely push the stack of legal documents toward me. I looked at him, and I did not see the air I had hoped for. I saw a man drowning. I knew he had some financial trouble, maybe some bad investments. But looking at his pale, clammy skin, I realized it was much worse than that. He could not even meet my eyes. He kept staring at the signature line on the transfer agreement, as if his life depended on my ink hitting that paper. Then there was Veronica, my daughter-in-law. She stood behind Preston's chair like a vulture waiting for a carcass. She was beautiful in that cold, sharp way she always cultivated. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, and a smile that felt like it was practiced in a mirror. Unlike my son, she was not nervous. She was vibrating with anticipation. I could see the greed dancing in her eyes. She looked at the company not as a legacy of hard work and diesel fumes, but as a giant ATM machine waiting to dispense cash. "Here you go, Dad," Veronica said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She placed a ceramic mug in front of me. It was my favorite mug, the one with the old Blackwood logo on it. "I made it special just for you. A double shot of espresso with a hint of hazelnut, just how you like it. You need your strength for all this paperwork." I looked at the coffee. It smelled rich and inviting. But my gut twisted. In the 10 years she had been married to my son, Veronica had never once made me a cup of coffee. She usually treated the kitchen like it was a foreign country. Why now? Why today of all days was she playing the role of the dutiful daughter-in-law? I reached for the mug, but before my fingers could touch the handle, the door to the kitchen swung open. Maria, our housekeeper, walked in carrying a pitcher of ice water. Maria has been with us for 20 years. She is a quiet woman, invisible to people like Veronica. She keeps her head down and does her job. But today she was clumsy. As she reached over to fill my water glass, she stumbled. Her hip checked my shoulder hard enough to make me jerk back. "Oh, lo siento, Mr. Harrison," she gasped. She grabbed a napkin to wipe a drop of water that had not even spilled, but as she leaned in close to my ear, her voice dropped to a frequency only I could hear. It was not an apology. It was a warning. "Don't drink. Poison. Trust me." She pulled back instantly, her face returning to a mask of submissive apology, but her eyes locked onto mine for a split second. I saw terror there. Pure, unadulterated terror. Maria knew that if she was caught warning me, she would lose her job or worse. Yet she did it anyway. I froze. My heart started hammering against my ribs like a piston in an overheated engine. I looked at the coffee. Then I looked at Veronica. She was watching me with an intensity that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She was holding her own cup of coffee, casually sipping it, but her eyes were glued to my hand. I had a choice to make in that fraction of a second. Did I trust the woman who married my son and was about to inherit my life work, or did I trust the woman who cleaned my floors? I thought about the time 10 years ago when I paid for Maria's daughter's surgery. I did it quietly. I never asked for anything in return. Loyalty is a currency you cannot buy, but you can earn. I decided to bet my life on Maria, but I needed to be smart. If I refused to drink, Veronica would know the game was up. If there was something in that cup, she would just find another way. I needed to know the truth, and I needed to turn the tables. I summoned every ounce of acting skill I had learned from 50 years of poker-faced business negotiations. I let my hand tremble just a bit, playing into their narrative that I was getting old and frail. I reached for the pen Preston was holding out to me, but I let my fingers fumble. The heavy metal pen clattered onto the hardwood floor and rolled under the table near Veronica's feet. "Oh, blast it," I muttered, my voice sounding weak and frustrated. My clumsy old hands. I saw a flash of annoyance cross Veronica's face, but she masked it quickly. She was so close to victory, she could taste it. She set her own coffee cup down on the table right next to mine to free her hands. "Let me get that for you, Dad," she said, bending down. This was it, the moment. I spent 30 years driving long-haul trucks. You develop reflexes on the road. You learn to react to a blown tire or a deer on the highway in a millisecond. My body moved before my brain could second-guess it. While Veronica's head was under the table and Preston was busy wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief, I reached out. My hand moved like a striking cobra. I grabbed my cup and switched it with hers. They were identical mugs, part of a set. I slid her cup in front of me and placed the tainted cup exactly where hers had been. It took less than a second. By the time Veronica straightened up holding the pen, I was sitting back in my chair looking confused and harmless. "Here you are," she said, placing the pen in my hand. "Now drink your coffee while it is hot. We want you sharp for the signatures." "Thank you, dear," I said. I lifted the cup. This was the point of no return. If Maria was wrong, I was just being a paranoid old man. If Maria was right, I was about to watch something horrific. I took a sip. It was good coffee. Just coffee. I watched Veronica over the rim of my mug. She picked up the cup that was now sitting in front of her. The cup that Maria said was poison. She raised it in a mock toast. "To the future of Blackwood Logistics," she said, smiling at Preston. "To the future," I echoed. She took a long, deep swallow. She practically drained half the cup. She was confident. She was arrogant. She thought she had won. I put the pen to the paper, pretending to read the fine print. I needed to stall. I needed to see what would happen. 1 minute passed. The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "Is something wrong, Dad?" Preston asked, his voice cracking. "Just sign it. I am reading, son. You taught me to always read the fine print, remember?" 2 minutes passed. Veronica started to fidget. She touched her forehead. She blinked rapidly as if her vision was blurring. "Are you okay, honey?" Preston asked, looking at her. "I feel a little dizzy," she mumbled, swaying slightly in her heels. "It must be the heat. It is hot in here, isn't it?" She reached for the table to steady herself, but her hand missed the edge. She stumbled back. Her face went from a healthy flush to a ghostly pale in seconds. Veronica Preston stood up, knocking his chair over. Suddenly, Veronica gasped. It was a horrible, wet sound, like she was trying to inhale underwater. Her eyes rolled back into her head, showing only the whites. She convulsed violently and crashed to the floor. Her head hit the glass base of the side table with a sickening crack. Veronica Preston screamed. I sat there frozen in my chair, clutching the pen. My God, Maria was right. It was happening fast. Too fast. Veronica's body arched off the floor, foam white and pink with blood started bubbling from her lips. Her limbs were thrashing uncontrollably. "Call 911, Preston yelled at me, his eyes wide with horror. "Dad, do something." I stood up slowly. My heart was breaking, not for the woman on the floor, but for the realization that my family had tried to kill me. I looked down at Veronica. She was choking on her own saliva. The poison was meant for me. They wanted me to have a stroke or a heart attack right here at the table right after I signed. I pulled out my phone and dialed emergency. But as I watched my son drop to his knees beside his wife, weeping and shaking, I saw something shift in his eyes. He looked up at me and the fear was gone, replaced by a sudden, desperate accusation. "What did you do?" Preston screamed at me, pointing a shaking finger. "You gave her that cup. You poisoned her." The accusation hung in the air. The ambulance was on its way, but the war had just begun. They tried to take my life, and failing that, they were about to try to take my freedom. I looked at the cup of coffee in front of me, the evidence that would either save me or condemn me, and I knew one thing for certain. Harrison Blackwood was not going down without a fight. The ambulance ride was a blur of flashing lights and the deafening wail of sirens that seemed to scream through the streets of Chicago. I sat in the front passenger seat of the rig, staring blankly at the traffic parting before us like the Red Sea. My mind was racing, faster than the vehicle. I kept replaying the image of Veronica convulsing on my Persian rug, the foam bubbling from her lips, the way her eyes had rolled back until they were nothing but white porcelain marbles. It was a sight that would haunt a weaker man, but I forced myself to look at it in my memory, to analyze it, to understand the weapon that had been intended for me. When we arrived at City General, the paramedics wheeled the stretcher out with frantic efficiency, shouting medical jargon that sounded like a foreign language. Preston had followed in his Porsche, and he was already there waiting by the emergency bay doors. He looked like a man possessed. His tie was loosened, his hair wild, and sweat was streaming down his face. As soon as my boots hit the pavement, he lunged at me. "You did this!" he screamed, his voice cracking with a hysteria that drew the attention of every nurse, orderly, and police officer in the vicinity. He pointed a shaking finger directly between my eyes. "What did you give her, Dad? What was in that cup?" I stood my ground, leaning slightly on my cane, not because I needed it, but because it made me look harmless. I watched my son closely. I have negotiated with union leaders, mobsters, and hostile takeover sharks. I know when someone is genuinely grieving, and I know when someone is performing. Preston was performing. He was terrified, yes, but not for his wife. He was terrified of the narrative. He needed to control the story before the police started asking real questions. Officer Miller, a young cop who looked like he had barely started shaving, stepped between us. "Sir, please calm down. Let the doctors work." Preston ignored him. He grabbed the lapels of my jacket, shaking me. "You are confused, aren't you? You have been mixing up your medications for weeks. I told you, Veronica. I told you we needed to watch him. He must have put his heart pills in her coffee. Oh God, she is going to die because he can't tell the difference between sugar and poison." The accusation hung in the sterile air of the emergency room entrance like a toxic cloud. I saw the shift in the eyes of the police officer. A moment ago, he was looking at a family tragedy. Now he was looking at a senile old man who had become a danger to society. It was a brilliant pivot. If Veronica died, and I was blamed, it was manslaughter due to diminished capacity. Preston would get immediate power of attorney over my estate, and he would sell my company before Veronica's body was even cold. I lowered my head, playing the part they had written for me. I stammered intentionally, making my voice sound weak and tremulous. I don't know, son. I just made the coffee. I thought it was just coffee." Preston turned to the officer, tears streaming down his face. Oscar-worthy tears. "You see, officer, he doesn't know. His mind comes and goes. We were trying to get him to sign over the company today, just to protect him from stress. And now this happens. It is my fault. I should have watched him closer. They ushered us into the waiting room. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. I sat in a plastic chair watching Preston pace back and forth. He was on his phone whispering furiously. I knew who he was calling. The loan sharks. He had to tell them the money was delayed. Or maybe he was calling the corrupt lawyer Drake to expedite the guardianship papers. Time stretched. Every minute felt like an hour. Police officers came by to ask questions, but they spoke to me slowly and loudly, as if I were a child or hard of hearing. I answered vaguely, feeding their assumption that I was losing my grip on reality. It was the only defense I had. If I acted too sharp, too defensive, they would wonder why I switched the cups. They would wonder if I did it on purpose. To survive, I had to be the victim of my own aging mind. Then I saw him. Dr. Evans. He was the chief of internal medicine at City General, but more importantly, he had been my personal physician and friend for 30 years. We played golf on Sundays. He knew my medical history better than I did. He walked into the waiting room looking grim. He spotted Preston, but walked straight past him to me. "Harrison, come with me," he said, his voice low and serious. Preston tried to intervene. "Doctor, how is she? Is she going to make it?" "She is stable for now," Dr. Evans said curtly. "But I need to speak to your father about his medical history to see if there is any cross-contamination possibility. Stay here." Dr. Evans led me down a long corridor away from the prying eyes of the police and my son. He swiped his badge and opened a door to a private consultation room. As soon as the door clicked shut, the professional mask dropped. He looked at me with an intensity that chilled me to the bone. "Drop the act, Harrison," he said. "I know you are not senile. We played golf 3 days ago, and you beat me by 4 strokes. I straightened my posture, rolling my shoulders back. "Thank you, Robert. It is getting exhausting playing the fool. How is she really?" "She is in a chemically induced coma to stop the seizures," Dr. Evans said. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his lab coat pocket. "We ran a toxicology screen. It was not easy to find. Most standard tests would miss it, but given the symptoms, I ordered a full-spectrum analysis." He handed me the paper. I looked at the chemical names, but they meant nothing to me. Scopolamine and digitalis. Evans translated, pointing to the spikes on the chart. "Do you know what this is?" I shook my head. Scopolamine is often called devil's breath in South America. Dr. Evans explained, his voice dropping to a whisper. "It eliminates free will. It makes the victim docile, compliant, and suggestible. You can tell someone to empty their bank account, and they will do it with a smile, and then forget it ever happened. In high doses, it causes hallucinations and respiratory failure." He paused, letting that sink in. "And digitalis is a heart medication derived from foxglove. It increases the intensity of the heartbeat. In the wrong dose, it causes cardiac arrest. Harrison, the mixture in her blood was precise. It was not designed to kill instantly. It was designed to cause a massive stroke or a psychotic break." I felt the blood drain from my face. They did not want to kill me. Death would trigger an autopsy. Death would trigger a probate battle. They wanted to break my mind, I realized aloud. "Exactly," Dr. Evans said. "If you had drunk that coffee, you would have signed those papers without hesitation. Then you would have either stroked out or been left in a permanent vegetative state. They would have packed you off to a facility, and you would have been too confused to ever tell anyone what happened. It is the perfect crime." I sank into the chair, my legs suddenly feeling like lead. I had underestimated them. I thought they were greedy. I did not know they were evil. I thought Preston was weak, but desperation had made him dangerous. And Veronica, she was the architect. I could see that now. The timing, the dosage. It was cold. It was calculated. Harrison, Dr. Evans leaned in close. This amount of digitalis. You do not have a heart condition. You do not have a prescription for this. Where did it come from? I thought about the medicine cabinet in the guest bathroom. Veronica's mother had stayed with us last Christmas. She had a heart condition. Her mother, I said. Veronica must have kept the leftover pills. Listen to me very carefully, Harrison, Dr. Evans said, grabbing my arm. You cannot go back to that house. This was an assassination attempt. If they failed once, they will try again. I can keep Veronica sedated for another 24 hours to buy you time. I will tell the police it was an adverse reaction to a diet supplement she was taking. I cannot report the poison yet without implicating you, since you are the one who supposedly served the coffee. He was right. If the toxicology report came out now, Preston would scream that I poisoned her. I had no proof that she spiked the cup. It was my word against theirs, and I was the one holding the smoking gun. No, I said. I have to go back. Are you insane? Dr. Evans hissed. I have to find the evidence, I said, standing up. They think I am confused. They think I am a doddering old man who made a mistake. That is my advantage. If I run now, they will know I am onto them. They will destroy the paper trail. They will burn the company to the ground before I can stop them. I need to find the plan. I need to find the leverage. Dr. Evans looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. You are a stubborn old mule, Harrison. You always have been. I need you to do one thing for me, Robert, I said. Keep her asleep, as long as you can, and tell the police that my stress levels are dangerously high. Tell them I need to be monitored at home, but that I am harmless. Buy me a day, just one day. I can do that, he agreed. But watch your back, Harrison. The next cup of coffee might be a bullet. I walked out of that room and back into the hallway. I adjusted my jacket and stooped my shoulders again, transforming back into the confused geriatric. I walked back toward the waiting room where my son was plotting my destruction. I looked at him, and for the first time in 40 years, I did not feel love. I did not feel disappointment. I felt nothing but the cold, hard resolve of a businessman closing a failing division. They wanted a war. They wanted to take my empire. They were about to learn that you do not hunt the predator in his own jungle. I took a deep breath and stepped back into the light, ready to play the game. The fluorescent lights of the recovery room hummed with a low, maddening buzz that seemed to drill directly into my skull. I sat in the corner on a hard plastic chair, my hands resting on the head of my cane, trying to look small, trying to look harmless. Dr. Evans stood near the door, his arms crossed his face, a mask of professional neutrality, but I could see the tension in his jaw. Preston was hovering over the hospital bed, holding Veronica's limp hand, performing the role of the devoted husband for an audience of one young police officer. Officer Miller was taking notes in a small pad, his brow furrowed in concentration. The room smelled of antiseptic and lies. We were waiting for the sleeping beauty to wake up. Or rather, we were waiting for the viper to uncoil. It happened slowly at first. The rhythm of the heart monitor quickened, beep, 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 speeding up like a ticking bomb. Veronica's eyelids fluttered. A low moan escaped her lips. It was a sound of genuine pain, and for a fleeting second I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the cold calculation in her eyes when she handed me that cup, and the guilt evaporated like mist in the morning sun. She opened her eyes. They were bloodshot, unfocused, swimming in a haze of drugs. She looked at the ceiling, then at Preston, and finally her gaze landed on me. For a moment, there was nothing but confusion. She blinked, trying to clear the fog. Then memory returned. I saw it happen in real time. The confusion sharpened into clarity, and the clarity hardened into a diamond-hard realization. She looked at me, and she knew. She knew I had switched the cups. She knew I had watched her drink her own poison. And she knew that if she accused me of poisoning her, she would have to explain why there was a lethal cocktail of heart medication and mind control drugs in a cup of coffee she prepared. I held her gaze, my face expressionless. It was a silent duel fought across the sterile expanse of a hospital room. Checkmate, Veronica, I thought. You cannot call the police because you are the criminal. But I had underestimated her ability to improvise. I had underestimated the sheer depth of her malice. Veronica let out a sob. It was a weak, broken sound that immediately drew everyone's sympathy. She squeezed Preston's hand. Water, she rasped. Preston scrambled to hold a cup with a straw to her lips. She took a small sip and then let her head fall back against the pillow, tears leaking from the corners of her eyes. She looked at Officer Miller, then she looked at me with an expression of heartbreaking forgiveness. "Oh, Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You poor thing." I frowned, genuinely confused for a moment. This was not the reaction I expected. I expected rage. I expected silence. I did not expect pity. Officer Miller stepped forward. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened? Do you remember drinking the coffee?" Veronica nodded slowly, wincing as if the movement hurt. "Yes. I made coffee for Harrison. For Dad. We were working on the papers. I set it down and then I must have picked up the wrong cup. Or maybe he got confused again." She turned her eyes to Preston, pleading for validation. "He's been mixing things up lately, hasn't he, honey?" she said softly. "The other day I found his heart pills in the sugar bowl. He gets so confused with his medication. I think he might have accidentally dropped his pills in the coffee thinking it was his water. It was brilliant. It was evil, and it was brilliant. She was not accusing me of attempted murder. That would require motive and investigation. She was accusing me of being a senile old man who had made a tragic mistake. She was weaponizing my age against me. Preston did not miss a beat. He jumped on the narrative like a drowning man grabbing a life raft. He turned to the officer, his face contorted with feigned realization. "Oh my God. That makes sense. That makes perfect sense." Preston looked at me, shaking his head sadly. "Officer, my father. We have been trying to keep it private, but he has been struggling. Early onset dementia. He hides it well in public, but at home, he forgets where he is. He forgets who we are. He mixes up his medications all the time." He turned back to Veronica, stroking her hair. "He must have thought he was taking his medicine." Preston continued, his voice thick with fake emotion. "And he dropped it in your cup by mistake. And you drank it. Oh God, Veronica, he almost killed you, because I haven't been watching him closely enough." The room shifted. I could feel it physically. The dynamic changed from a potential crime scene investigation to a family tragedy. Officer Miller stopped looking at me with suspicion and started looking at me with pity. That terrible, condescending pity that society reserves for the useless elderly. "Mr. Blackwood," the officer said, speaking slowly and loudly. "Do you remember putting pills in the coffee?" I opened my mouth to deny it, to roar that I was sharper than all of them combined, but I stopped. I looked at Veronica. She was watching me through her lashes, a tiny triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She was daring me. If I argued, if I shouted, if I claimed conspiracy, I would look paranoid. I would look exactly like a dementia patient in denial. Agitation is a symptom, the doctors always say. The more I fought, the more I would prove their point. They had trapped me. If I told the truth that she poisoned me and I switched the cups, I would be admitting to knowingly causing her harm. I would be arrested for assault, or worse. But if I accepted their lie, I was admitting I was incompetent. I was admitting I needed a guardian. I looked at Dr. Evans. He gave a microscopic shake of his head. Wait. That was his message. Wait. I slumped my shoulders. I let my hand with the cane tremble visibly. I looked down at the floor, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know, I was just... I wanted to sign the papers. I took my pills. I thought I took my pills. I looked up at Veronica, my eyes wide with manufactured fear. Did I hurt you, Veronica? I didn't mean to. I get so confused sometimes. The days, they run together. Veronica reached out a hand toward me, a gesture of saintly forgiveness that made me want to vomit. It is okay, Dad, she said. We know you didn't mean it. We know you aren't yourself anymore. That is why we need to take care of you. Preston put a hand on my shoulder, heavy and possessive. Officer, I think we can decline to press charges, Preston said solemnly. This was an accident. A medical accident caused by my father's condition. We will handle it internally. We just need to get him home and ensure he has 24-hour supervision. We can't let him handle his own medications anymore, or his own affairs. It is clearly too dangerous. Officer Miller nodded, closing his notebook. I understand, Mr. Blackwood. It is a difficult situation. My grandmother went through the same thing. If you are sure you don't want to file a report, I can clear this up. I am sure, Preston said. He is my father. We just want him safe. Safe. The word sounded like a prison sentence. They had done it. In 10 minutes, they had stripped me of my agency. They had turned the tables so completely that I was no longer the victim of an assassination attempt. I was a liability that needed to be managed. Dr. Evans stepped forward then. I will need to keep Veronica for observation overnight, he said firmly. And regarding Harrison, I agree that he shouldn't be left alone. However, given the stress of this event, I strongly recommend against moving him to a facility immediately. It could trigger a psychotic break. Let him go home. Let him rest in his own bed. I will arrange for a private nurse to monitor him tonight. Preston narrowed his eyes. He wanted to isolate me immediately. He wanted me in a locked room where I couldn't talk to lawyers or bankers, but he couldn't argue with the chief of medicine in front of a cop. Fine, Preston agreed. But I will hire the nurse, and I will be staying at the house tonight. To make sure he doesn't have another accident. Veronica smiled weakly from the bed. Thank you, Preston. Take care of Dad. Make sure he signs those papers tomorrow. We can't let the business suffer just because he is fading away. I looked at her one last time. She had won the battle. She had turned her own poisoning into a weapon to strip me of my rights. She thought she had broken me. She thought I was going to go home and fade away into the twilight of senility she had painted for me. I shuffled toward the door, leaning heavily on my cane, letting Preston guide me by the elbow like a toddler. Come on, Dad, Preston said, his voice dripping with condescension. Let's get you home. You have had a big day. I walked out of that hospital room, leaving the Viper in her bed. My head was bowed, my steps were shuffling, but inside my mind was sharp cold and clear as a winter morning. They thought they were taking a confused old man home. They were wrong. They were bringing a Trojan horse into their fortress. I had played the fool to buy my freedom. Now I had 12 hours. 12 hours before the sun rose. 12 hours to find the proof to break the trap, and to remind my son that the lion is most dangerous when it is wounded and backed into a corner. The game had changed. It was no longer about business. It was about survival. And I intended to survive. The ride back to my estate was a funeral procession of one. I sat in the back of Preston's car, watching the iron gates of Blackwood Manor swing open, not to welcome the master of the house, but to imprison him. The house I had built brick by brick, with the profits of my first major fleet expansion, now loomed over me like a Gothic mausoleum. Preston did not park in the garage. He pulled right up to the front steps where a man was waiting. He was built like a vending machine, with a neck as thick as a tree stump, and eyes that looked like they had seen everything and felt nothing. He wore scrubs that were 2 sizes too tight, but I knew a bouncer when I saw one. This was not a medical professional. This was muscle. "Dad, this is Greg," Preston said, parking the car. "He is a specialized geriatric nurse. He is going to stay with you tonight just to monitor your vitals and make sure you don't get confused again." I looked at Greg. His knuckles were scarred. I doubted he knew how to take a pulse, but I was certain he knew how to break a wrist. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Blackwood," Greg grunted. His voice sounded like gravel in a blender. I leaned heavily on my cane, playing my part. "Hello, young man. Are you here to help me with my pills?" "Something like that," Greg said. They marched me up the stairs to my master suite. It was humiliating. My son held my left elbow, and this stranger held my right, as if I were a toddler learning to walk. They ushered me into my bedroom, the room where I had slept alone since my wife Eleanor passed 5 years ago. "Get some rest, Dad," Preston said, backing toward the door. "Greg will be right outside in the hall. If you need anything at all, you just knock. Do not try to go downstairs. We don't want you falling." The door clicked shut. I heard the distinct heavy thud of a chair being placed against the wood on the other side. I was a prisoner in my own castle. I waited until I heard Preston's footsteps fade down the hallway. I walked to the window. It was a 20-foot drop to the patio. No escape there. I checked my cell phone. No signal. They must have installed a jammer or cut the router. I was cut off from the world. But Preston had forgotten one thing. He grew up in this house, but I designed it. I knew its secrets. I knew that in 1995, when we renovated the East Wing, I had insisted on keeping the old laundry chute access panel in the back of the walk-in closet. It was too small for a man to fit through, but next to it was a narrow service door that led to the attic crawl space, which dropped down a maintenance ladder directly into the utility room in the basement. It was designed for electricians and plumbers to access the wiring without disturbing the family. Preston probably didn't even know it existed. I sat on the edge of my bed and waited. I needed the house to settle. I needed Greg to get bored and complacent. Hours ticked by. I watched the moon rise through the window, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. My stomach rumbled, reminding me I hadn't eaten since breakfast, but hunger was a sharp clarity I welcomed. Around 2 a.m, I heard the heavy rhythmic snoring coming from the hallway. My jailer was asleep. I moved. I did not need the cane now. I moved with the silent tread of a hunter. I went into the closet, pushed aside the racks of Italian suits that I rarely wore anymore, and found the panel. It was stiff, painted over, but a little leverage with a metal shoehorn popped it open. The air inside smelled of dust and old insulation. I squeezed through, finding the ladder by touch in the pitch black. The descent was hard. My joints ached and my heart hammered against my ribs, but adrenaline is a powerful painkiller. I climbed down past the second floor, past the first floor, until my feet touched the cold concrete of the basement utility room. I opened the door a crack. The basement hallway was dark, but a sliver of light spilled from under the door of the laundry room at the far end. I crept toward it. The hum of a dryer covered the sound of my footsteps. I pushed the door open. Maria was there. She was sitting on a stool folding towels, her hands moving with mechanical precision, but her shoulders were shaking. She was crying silently. When she saw me, she gasped and dropped a white sheet clutching her chest. "Mr. Harrison," she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "You should not be here. The man upstairs, he said he would break my legs if I spoke to you." I put a finger to my lips and closed the door behind me, locking it. "Maria," I said, keeping my voice low, "you saved my life today. But I need you to be brave for 5 more minutes. I need to know exactly what you saw." She looked at the door, as if expecting it to burst open, then she looked back at me. Her face was a map of conflict, torn between fear and loyalty. She took a deep breath and wiped her hands on her apron. I was in the kitchen, she began, her voice trembling. Mrs. Veronica, she came in. She told me to leave to go clean the patio, but I forgot my phone on the counter, so I came back. She didn't hear me. The blender was on. Maria mimed a grinding motion. She had a mortar and pestle, Mr. Harrison. Not for spices. She was crushing pills. Blue pills, many of them. Little blue octagons. Digitalis pills are often blue. My heart went cold. She put the powder in the French press, she continued. Then she brewed the coffee. She was smiling, Mr. Harrison. She was humming a song while she poisoned you. I felt a wave of nausea. To kill is one thing. To sing while you do it is another level of psychopathy. Did she say anything, I asked? Did she make a call? Maria nodded vigorously. Sigh. After she poured the cups, she called Mr. Preston. He was in his study. I heard him because I was hiding in the pantry. She told him. She said, "It is done. The old man drinks in 10 minutes. And Preston, I asked, needing to hear it, needing to know the depth of my son's betrayal. What did he say? He was on speaker, Maria said. He sounded panicked but happy. He said, "Thank God. After tonight we will have $500 million. The buyers are waiting." 500 million. The number hit me like a physical blow. The company was worth at least 800 million on a bad day. If they were selling for 500, they were liquidating. They were selling it for parts in a fire sale to get cash fast. They were going to strip 50 years of my hard work down to the copper wiring and sell it to the highest bidder, probably our competitor Red Rock, just to cover Preston's gambling debts. I leaned against the washing machine, feeling the vibration against my back. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just a takeover. It was an execution. Why, Maria? I asked softly, looking at this woman who had risked everything to warn me. Why did you help me? You know what they will do to you if they find out. Maria stopped crying. She stood up straighter, and for a moment she didn't look like a maid. She looked like a matriarch. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small, worn photograph. She handed it to me. It was a picture of a man sitting in a wheelchair, smiling next to a young girl in a graduation gown. I recognized the man. Jose. Her husband. 15 years ago, she said, her voice steady now. Jose fell from the roof while fixing the leak in the west wing. The insurance company, they said it was his fault. They said they wouldn't pay. He needed 3 surgeries. We were going to lose our house. We were going to lose everything. I remembered. I remembered the accident. I remembered the insurance adjuster, a weasel of a man, trying to deny the claim. You came to the hospital. Maria said, tears welling up again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. You didn't send a lawyer. You didn't send an assistant. You came. You gave the hospital a check for the full amount. You paid for his rehab. You paid for my daughter Sophia's tuition because I couldn't work while I cared for him. She took a step closer to me, grabbing my hands in hers. Her palms were rough from years of hard work, but they were warm. You told me, Maria, family takes care of family. You never asked me to pay you back. You never even mentioned it again. That day you saved my family, Mr. Harrison. Today I just tried to pay a little bit of that debt. I looked at the photograph, then at Maria. I had forgotten. To me, it was a check written on a Tuesday afternoon, a problem solved with money I wouldn't miss. To her, it was her entire life. It was her husband's ability to walk. It was her daughter's future. I squeezed her hands. You paid it back, Maria, with interest. You saved more than my life. You saved my soul, because for a moment up there I thought I had no one left. We stood there for a moment, 2 conspirators in the basement of a house built on lies, bound together by a decade-old act of kindness. But Maria, I said, urgently, pulling away. We aren't safe yet. The pills, The blue pills. Do you know where the bottle is? Did she throw it away? Maria shook her head. No. She put the empty bottle in her purse. The expensive one. The red one. She didn't want to leave it in the trash. Of course. Veronica was too smart to leave evidence in the kitchen bin, but arrogant enough to keep it on her person. Thank you, Maria, I said. Now listen to me. You need to go back to your room. Lock the door. If anyone asks, you saw nothing. You heard nothing. You were asleep. Can you do that? Si, patron, she whispered. But what will you do? I am going to take back what is mine, I said, my voice hardening. I climbed back up the ladder, my muscles burning, my resolve colder than the steel rungs. I had the motive. $500 million. I had the method. Blue pills in a red purse. And I had the witness. As I squeezed back through the closet panel into my bedroom, I heard the snore of the nurse outside. He was still asleep. I brushed the dust off my pajamas and lay down in the bed, staring at the ceiling. They wanted to sell my legacy for scrap. They wanted to erase me. Tomorrow was the board meeting. They thought I would be a drooling vegetable by then, or locked away in a facility. They were wrong. I closed my eyes, visualizing the red purse, visualizing the contract, visualizing the look on Preston's face when the hammer dropped. I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to burn their entire scheme to the ground, and I was going to enjoy watching the ashes settle. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of my bedroom, but it brought no warmth. I lay still in the bed, listening to the sounds of the house waking up. Downstairs, I heard the clatter of heels on marble and the low murmur of voices. It was Veronica and Preston. They were leaving for the appointment with Drake, the lawyer, who had sold his soul for a retainer fee. They were going to draft the emergency guardianship papers that would sign my life away. I heard the front door close and the distinctive purr of Preston's Audi engine fading down the driveway. They were gone. Now it was just me and Greg, the nurse who was currently sitting in the hallway chair, watching a football game on his phone with the volume turned up. He thought I was asleep. He thought I was a medicated old man who couldn't even make it to the bathroom without a walker. He was about to learn that you never underestimate a man who built a fortune hauling steel across the Rockies in a blizzard. I waited 10 minutes to be sure. Then I stood up. I didn't need the cane. I moved to the door and listened. Greg was laughing at something on his screen. Perfect. I needed to get to Preston's study, which was on the second floor at the end of the east wing. It was far enough away that if I was quiet, Greg would never hear me. I opened my bedroom door a crack. Greg's back was to me. I slipped out into the hallway, my socks moving silently on the plush carpet. I moved like a ghost. I passed the portraits of my ancestors, past the vase from the Ming dynasty that Veronica had bought with my money, and reached the heavy oak door of the study. It was locked, of course. Preston was paranoid. He had every right to be. I reached into my pocket. I had snagged a stiff piece of wire from a spiral notebook in the nightstand drawer. It wasn't a professional lockpick, but I spent 20 years fixing engines and rigging latches on the road. A simple interior door lock was a joke to me. I knelt down my knees, protesting, with a sharp shot of pain, but I ignored it. I slid the wire into the keyhole, feeling for the tumblers. It took 3 seconds. Click. The handle turned. I slipped inside and locked the door behind me. The room smelled of stale scotch and cold sweat. It was a mess. Papers were strewn everywhere. The trash can was overflowing. This was not the office of a CEO. It was the bunker of a man under siege. I went straight to the painting behind the desk, a portrait of Preston receiving his MBA. I pulled it aside. There it was, the wall safe. It was a Titan model digital keypad, reinforced steel. Most people would look at it and see an impenetrable fortress. I looked at it and saw a machine I had purchased myself 5 years ago when I remodeled this office for him. I knew this safe. I knew that the Titan series from that year had a mechanical redundancy, a failsafe for when the batteries died. There was a magnetic solenoid inside that could be tripped if you knew exactly where to hit it. I didn't have a magnet, but I had physics. I grabbed a heavy brass letter opener from the desk. I pressed my ear against the cold steel of the safe door. I spun the handle, putting tension on the bolt. Then I struck the side of the safe hard right over the locking mechanism. Bam! I turned the handle. Nothing. I struck it again harder this time, vibrating the impact through my arm. Bam! Click! The handle gave way. The door swung open. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I reached into the dark metal cavity. I expected to find stacks of cash, maybe jewelry, maybe even illegal drugs. What I found was much worse. It was empty of value but full of secrets. I pulled out a thick stack of papers bound with a rubber band. My hands were steady now, fueled by a cold, focused rage. I sat in Preston's leather chair and began to read. The first document was a promissory note. It wasn't from a bank. It was handwritten on heavy cream paper. The header simply said, "The Syndicate." I scanned the figures. My vision blurred for a second, and I had to blink to clear it. $15 million. Preston owed $15 million to an underground gambling ring. I looked at the dates. He had been borrowing for 3 years, trying to chase his losses, digging the hole deeper and deeper. The interest rate was astronomical. It was predatory. And then I saw the deadline. Payment due in full. Midnight. Tomorrow. My stomach churned. This was why he was sweating. This was why he was shaking. If he didn't pay them by tomorrow night, they wouldn't just break his legs. They would kill him. He was a dead man walking. I flipped to the next document. This one was typed. It was a draft contract stamped with the logo of Red Rock Corporation, our biggest and most ruthless competitor. I knew the CEO of Red Rock. He was a shark who had been trying to buy me out for a decade. I had always told him to go to hell. I read the terms. It was an asset purchase agreement. They were buying Blackwood Logistics, the fleet, the warehouses, the contracts, the brand, everything. I looked at the purchase price, $450 million. I gasped aloud. The company was worth $800 million conservatively, $1 billion in the right market. Preston was selling my life's work for 50 cents on the dollar. He was liquidating a billion-dollar empire just to get a quick cash infusion to pay off a gambling debt. He was going to take the $450 million pay, the $15 million to the mob, and likely squander the rest with Veronica within a few years. They were burning down the castle just to warm their hands. I dropped the papers on the desk. I felt sick, physically ill. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. I remembered teaching Preston to ride a bike. I remembered his graduation. I remembered the day I gave him his first office. I had been so proud. I thought I was raising a king. Instead, I had raised a parasite. It wasn't fear that made me tremble. It was a profound, agonizing grief. The boy I loved was gone. In his place was a desperate, cornered animal who was willing to drug his own father and sell his family legacy to save his own skin. I looked at the date on the Red Rock contract. It was dated for tomorrow. The meeting was set for 2 in the afternoon. That was their endgame. They would get the guardianship papers in the morning, force the sale in the afternoon, and wire the money to the mob by midnight. It was a tight timeline, a desperate timeline. And Veronica knew. She had to know. The notes in the margins were in her handwriting. Push for cash closing, she had written. No stock options. She was orchestrating the fire sale. I stood up. My knees felt weak, but my resolve was hardening into something unbreakable. I took out my phone and snapped photos of every single page. The debt, the threats, the contract, the notes. I made sure the images were clear. This was the motive. This was the proof that their petition for guardianship wasn't about my health. It was about a frantic cover-up of massive criminal negligence. I put the papers back in the safe exactly as I found them. I closed the door and spun the handle, locking it tight. I hung the painting back on the wall. I wiped my fingerprints from the desk. I unlocked the study door and peeked into the hallway. Greg was still there, still glued to his phone, oblivious to the fact that the prisoner had just engaged in corporate espionage 5 doors down. I crept back to my room. I slid the wire back into the drawer. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my hands. They were the hands of a worker. Calloused, aged, but strong. Preston had made his choice. He had chosen the easy way out. He had chosen betrayal. He thought he could sell my sweat and blood to pay for his sins. I picked up the phone Maria had given me, the burner phone I had hidden under the mattress. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. Mr. Thorne answered on the first ring. Thorne was my corporate attorney, but more than that, he was my conscience. He was the only man in Chicago who hated Red Rock as much as I did. "Hello," Thorne said, his voice raspy with age. "It's Harrison," I said. Harrison Thorne sounded shocked. "I heard you were unwell. Preston said you were having episodes." "Preston is a liar," I said, my voice cutting through the static. "Listen to me carefully, Thorne. I need you to initiate the Phoenix Protocol." There was a long silence on the other end. The Phoenix Protocol was a nuclear option we had designed 20 years ago, a failsafe to protect the company in case of a hostile takeover or kidnapping. It froze all assets, locked the board of directors, and required biometric verification from the founder to unlock. "Are you sure?" Harrison Thorne asked. "Once we start this, there is no going back. It signals to the street that the company is in crisis." "I am sure," I said. "And Thorne, call the district attorney. Tell him I have evidence of a conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted murder." "Attempted murder?" Thorne gasped. "Who?" "My son," I said, and the words tasted like ash in my mouth. "My son and his wife." I hung up the phone. I lay back on the pillows and stared at the ceiling. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was being pushed aside by the cold machinery of war. They wanted to sell Blackwood Logistics. They wanted to sell me. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, they were going to walk into that boardroom expecting a coronation. Instead, they were going to walk into an execution, and I would be the one pulling the switch. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and black, which felt fitting for the funeral that was being planned downstairs. Not a funeral for a body, but for a legacy. I was back in my room, the prisoner of my own making, but this time I was armed. While Greg the nurse had taken a long bathroom break to scroll through social media, I had slipped downstairs one last time. I did not go to the safe or the pantry. I went to the antique credenza in the living room where I kept a small keepsake box from my early days on the road. Inside was a device we used to call a spider. It was a long-range listening transmitter used by fleet managers to catch drivers who were selling fuel on the side. It was old tech battery operated and ugly, but it was reliable. I had stuck it firmly to the underside of the heavy oak coffee table in the center of the room. Now I sat on the edge of my bed wearing a pair of old noise-canceling headphones that I told Greg I used for meditation. He didn't care. He was just happy I was quiet. I turned the dial on the receiver, and the static cleared. The audio was crisp. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. I could hear Maria setting down coasters. And then I heard the doorbell ring. It was a heavy, authoritative ring. The kind of ring that expects to be answered immediately. I heard the front door open. I heard the heavy footsteps of men who walk like they own the pavement. Mr. Carter, Veronica's voice floated through the headphones. She sounded charming. It was the same voice she used at charity galas before she slashed the budget for the soup kitchen. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor. Carter, the CEO of Red Rock. The man who had tried to bankrupt me in '89. The man who sued me in '95. The man who was now standing in my living room wiping his feet on my rug. "Harrison is upstairs," Carter asked. His voice was like grinding gears. "Is the old man dead yet?" My hand clenched the bedsheet. He didn't even have the decency to lower his voice. "Not dead," Veronica replied calmly. "Just absent. The doctor says his brain is effectively mush. He is confused, docile, and very pliable." I closed my eyes. Mush. That is what she thought of me. The man who taught her how to read a balance sheet. The man who welcomed her into the family when her own parents cut her off. To her, I was just obstacle meat. Good Carter grunted. I heard the sound of leather creaking as he sat down. Probably in my favorite armchair. And the papers. "Preston has them ready," Veronica said. I heard a glass being set down on the table right above the microphone. The sound was deafening in my ears. "So Preston," Carter said, and I could hear the sneer in his voice. "You are finally the big man, finally stepping out of Daddy's shadow. How does it feel to sell out your heritage for pennies?" "It is not selling out." Preston's voice was shaky. "It is a strategic merger. We are preserving the brand." Preserving, Carter laughed. It was a bark of a laugh. "Kid, I am going to strip that brand off the trucks by Monday morning. I am buying the routes and the warehouses. The name Blackwood goes in the trash where it belongs." There was a silence. I waited for Preston to defend me. I waited for him to stand up and say that the Blackwood name meant quality, meant integrity. "Just sign the check," Preston said softly. "That is all I care about." $15 million goes to your friends in Vegas," Carter said. "The rest goes to the company account. You get your cut after the acquisition is finalized." "Wait," Preston said. "We agreed on an immediate wire transfer. We altered the deal," Carter said. "I need to make sure the old man actually signs. If he wakes up, if he gets a moment of clarity and calls the cops, this whole deal blows up. I am not wiring $500 million until I have his signature notarized and verified. He will sign," Veronica cut in. Her voice was ice. "He will do exactly what I tell him to do. He is terrified. He thinks he accidentally poisoned me. He is drowning in guilt and confusion. And if he balks," Carter asked, "if he has a moment of lucidity." "Then we go to Plan B," Veronica said. I leaned in, pressing the headphones tighter to my ears. "Plan B?" Preston asked, his voice rising in panic. "Veronica, we talked about this. No more drugs. The doctor said another dose could kill him." Veronica laughed. It was a low, dark sound. "So what if it does?" she said. "If he dies of a heart attack tomorrow, it solves all our problems. We inherit everything. We don't even need the sale. We just take the life insurance and sell the company later." "No," Preston shouted. I heard the sound of him standing up. "No. You promised. We get the signature and we put him in a home. A nice home. We are not killing my father." The sound of a slap echoed through the headphones like a gunshot. It was sharp and violent. I flinched in my bedroom. "Sit down," Veronica hissed. There was a pause. I could hear Preston breathing heavily, ragged and terrified. "You are pathetic," Veronica said, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You are a useless coward, Preston. You dug this hole. You gambled away our money. You borrowed from the cartel. I am the one fixing your mess. I am the one doing the dirty work. So do not you dare grow a conscience now." "But he is my dad." Preston whimpered. "He is a liability," Veronica spat. "And listen to me carefully. If he does not sign tomorrow, if he hesitates for 1 second. I have the syringe ready. It is in my purse. 1 injection and his heart stops. and I will make it look like he died in his sleep. Do you understand me? Silence. Do you understand me? She repeated louder. Yes, Preston whispered. Yes. Good. Now pour Mr. Carter a drink. We have a victory to celebrate. I took the headphones off. My hands were trembling, but not from age. They were trembling from a grief so profound, it felt like my chest was caved in. I sat there in the dark, listening to the silence of the room, my son. The boy I held when he had nightmares. The boy I taught to fish. The man I groomed to take over the empire. He had just stood there and let his wife threaten to murder me. He had negotiated the price of my life and settled for a wire transfer. Tears, hot and stinging, welled up in my eyes. I let them fall. I didn't wipe them away. I let them soak into the collar of my shirt. This was it. The final severance. The last thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, Preston was being manipulated against his will was gone. He was not a victim. He was an accomplice. He was willing to watch me die, to save himself. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the grounds of the estate. I saw the lights of Carter's limousine parked in the driveway. They were down there drinking my scotch, toasting to my demise. I wiped my face with the back of my hand. The tears were done. The sorrow was done. All that was left was a cold, hard resolve. They wanted a signature. I would give them a signature. They wanted a show. I would give them a show. I went to the closet and pulled out my suit. Not the comfortable wool cardigan they had dressed me in to make me look frail. I pulled out the charcoal three-piece suit I wore when I hostilely acquired the Midwest distribution hub in '98. I pulled out the red tie, the power tie. I hid them in the back of the closet behind the winter coats. I would need them for tomorrow. I checked the burner phone. A text from Thorne. Team is ready. 2 p.m. Good. I looked at the door where Greg was still guarding a man he thought was a vegetable. Sleep well, Preston, I whispered to the empty room. Enjoy your drink, because tomorrow you are going to learn that you don't inherit the Blackwood name. You have to earn it. And you just failed the final exam. The morning arrived with a deceptive beauty that felt like a personal insult. Sunlight streamed through the French doors of the dining room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and casting long golden rectangles across the table. The smell of maple syrup and crispy bacon filled the house, a scent that usually meant lazy Sundays and family laughter. Today, it smelled like a trap. I walked into the room leaning heavily on my cane, my steps shuffling and uneven. Not because I was weak, but because I had to maintain the illusion of the confused old man for just a few more hours. Greg, the nurse who was actually a prison guard in scrubs, walked a step behind me, his shadow looming over my back. He guided me to my chair at the head of the table. The table was set for a feast. There were platters of fruit, stacks of waffles, and a silver carafe of coffee steaming in the morning light. It was a scene from a magazine, except for the shark sitting to my left. Mr. Drake. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my first house, and a watch that was too big for his wrist. Drake was the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances until he realized he could make more money chasing inheritances. He had a smile that showed too many teeth and eyes that were dead flat and predatory. "Good morning, Harrison Drake," said his voice smooth as oil. "You are looking rested." I sat down, moving with exaggerated slowness. I looked at the table. I looked at Preston, who was pushing a piece of melon around his plate with a fork, staring intently at the tablecloth. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His skin was gray, and there was a tremor in his hand that rattled his silverware against the china. And then there was Veronica. She was radiant. She wore a white silk blouse and held a cup of coffee with steady, manicured hands. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom moments before the execution. "Eat up, Dad," Veronica said, pushing a plate of waffles toward me. "You have a big day today. You need your energy." I looked at the food. I looked at the coffee. My stomach clenched. I wondered if the syrup was laced with arsenic, or if the butter was mixed with sedatives. I pushed the plate away, my hand trembling just enough to sell the performance. "I am not hungry," I mumbled, my voice raspy. Who is this man?" Veronica sighed, a dramatic sound of exhaustion that she performed for Drake's benefit. "Dad, you remember Mr. Drake? He is the family attorney. He is here to help us with the paperwork. Remember, we talked about this." "I don't remember any paperwork," I said, looking at Preston. "I just want to go to the garden." "Preston, you said we could go to the garden." Preston flinched. He finally looked up, and for a second I saw the torture in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, maybe to offer me a crumb of kindness, but Veronica cut him off. "We can go to the garden later, Dad, after we handle business." Drake cleared his throat. He reached down and lifted a heavy leather briefcase onto the table. The sound of the latches clicking open echoed in the silence like the cocking of a gun. He pulled out a thick document bound in a blue folder. "Harrison, we have a situation," Drake said, his tone shifting from polite to professional gravity. "Given the incident yesterday, the confusion with the medications, the poisoning scare, the family is very concerned about your ability to manage your affairs." I looked at the folder. The words "emergency guardianship" were printed in bold letters at the top. Below that, in smaller print, "petition for incapacity." "What is this?" I asked, feigning ignorance, though I knew exactly what it was. It was a legal straitjacket. "It is a safety measure," Veronica said, leaning forward. Her voice dropped an octave, losing the fake sweetness and revealing the steel beneath. "It transfers your decision-making powers to Preston and me. Your finances, your medical decisions, your living arrangements, everything." I looked at Preston. "Son," I said softly, "you are doing this. You are taking my life away." Preston looked down at his hands. "It is for your own good, Dad. You almost killed Veronica yesterday. You aren't safe." I almost laughed. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. I looked back at Veronica. I saw the triumph in her eyes. She thought she had me cornered. "I won't sign," I said, pushing the folder away. "I am chairman. I built this company. I am not signing anything." The room went deadly silent. Greg shifted behind me, his presence a physical threat. Veronica set her coffee cup down. It made a sharp clinking sound against the saucer. She stood up and walked around the table until she was standing right next to me. She smelled of expensive perfume and rot. She leaned down so her face was inches from mine. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "You have two choices, Harrison. Option 1, you sign these papers voluntarily. We go to the office, you shake hands with the Red Rock executives, you sign the sale agreement, and you retire in dignity. You stay in this house. You keep your garden." She paused, letting the promise hang in the air, before she pulled out the knife. "Option 2, she continued, her eyes boring into mine. "You refuse. If you refuse, Mr. Drake has a second set of papers ready. These are for an involuntary commitment. We have the statement from Dr. Evans, or rather the statement we paid Dr. Evans to sign, saying you are a danger to yourself and others." She pulled a second folder from the briefcase. It was red. "If we go this route," Veronica hissed, "we won't keep you here. We have already reserved a bed at the Pines." "Do you know the Pines, Harrison? It is a secure memory care facility 2 hours north of here. It is isolated. It is locked. And they don't allow visitors for the first 6 months. No phone, no Maria. Just you and 4 walls until you rot." I felt a chill run down my spine. The Pines. I knew it. It was a warehouse for the forgotten, a place where they sedated the elderly to keep them quiet. "You wouldn't," I whispered, looking at my son. "Preston, you wouldn't let her do that." Preston didn't move. He didn't speak. He just sat there staring at his melon, watching his inheritance get secured. His silence was louder than any scream. It was the final betrayal. He was not just weak. He was complicit. He was willing to bury me alive to pay his debts. Veronica straightened up, smoothing her skirt. The car is waiting, Harrison. Greg is ready to escort you, either to the office to sign the sale or to the van that takes you to the Pines. It is your choice, right now. I looked around the room. I looked at Drake, who was checking his watch, indifferent to the destruction of a family. I looked at Greg, who was cracking his knuckles. I looked at the sunny garden outside the window, the world I was about to lose. I knew I had to act fast. If I refused, they would sedate me right here. Greg would stick a needle in my arm and I would wake up in a padded room. I would miss the meeting. The Phoenix Protocol would never be activated. I would lose. To win, I had to surrender. I had to let them think they had broken me. I let my shoulders slump. I let the cane slide from my hand and clatter to the floor. I covered my face with my hands and let out a shuddering breath, acting the part of the defeated, broken old man. Please, I whispered. Please don't send me away. Not the Pines. Then sign, Veronica said, sliding the blue folder back in front of me. I looked up, my eyes wet with forced tears. I will sign, I said, my voice trembling. I will do whatever you want. Just let me stay home. Good, Veronica said. Her smile returned, bright and terrifying. But we aren't signing here. We are signing at the office. Mr. Carter wants to see you put pen to paper in person. He wants to make sure you are fully on board. She snapped her fingers at Greg. Get him dressed. The nice suit. We leave in 20 minutes. Greg grabbed my arm and hauled me up. I leaned on him heavily, playing the invalid. As I shuffled out of the room, I looked back one last time. Veronica was high-fiving Drake. Preston was chugging his coffee, his hand shaking so bad he spilled it on his tie. They thought it was over. They thought they had won. They didn't know that by taking me to the office, they were walking me right into my command center. They were giving me the high ground. I went upstairs to dress. I put on the charcoal suit I had hidden. I tied the red tie. I looked in the mirror. The confused old man was gone. Staring back at me was Harrison Blackwood, the shark who ate other sharks for breakfast. I checked my pocket. The burner phone was there, silent and ready. I checked my other pocket. The photos of the documents from the safe were secure. 20 minutes later, I walked down the stairs. Veronica looked at me and frowned. You look surprisingly sharp, she said suspiciously. I wanted to look good for the sale, I said, keeping my voice low and meek. It is a big day. She shrugged, dismissing her doubt. It didn't matter how I looked as long as I signed. We got into the limousine. I sat between Preston and Veronica. Drake sat opposite us. The car pulled away from the house and turned onto the highway toward the city. I looked out the window, watching the skyline approach. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, Mr. Thorne was waiting. The police were waiting. And justice was waiting. Veronica pulled out her phone and made a call. We are en route, she said. Have the champagne ready. Yes, he is cooperating. It is done. She hung up and patted my knee. Don't worry, Dad. This will be quick. Just a few signatures and you can come back home and take a nap. You won't have to worry about running the business ever again. I nodded, staring straight ahead. You are right, Veronica, I said softly. I won't have to worry about a thing. Because by the time the sun set today, one of us would be in handcuffs and the other would be the undisputed king of Blackwood logistics. And I had never lost a negotiation in my life. The drive was smooth, but my pulse was thundering. I was the Trojan horse and I had just breached the city gates. The final act was about to begin. The elevator ride to the top floor of Blackwood Logistics took exactly 45 seconds. I counted every floor, watching the numbers climb just as I had done thousands of times before. Usually this ride filled me with pride. Today it felt like walking the Green Mile. Veronica stood to my left, checking her reflection in the polished brass doors, ensuring her victory face was perfect. Preston stood to my right, staring at his shoes vibrating with a nervous energy that smelled like cheap cologne and fear. When the doors slid open, the reception area was quiet, too quiet. Veronica had cleared the floor. No secretaries, no assistants, just the empty glass corridors of the empire I built. She guided me toward the main boardroom, the same room where I had crushed competitors and saved the company from bankruptcy 3 times. Now I was walking in to surrender it. Inside the boardroom, the air was frigid. Sitting at the far end of the long granite table was Carter, the CEO of Red Rock. He didn't stand up when I entered. He just watched me with eyes like a shark sensing blood in the water. Flanking him were 2 of his corporate lawyers' suits who looked like they charged by the breath. "Well," Carter rumbled, his voice echoing in the large room. "The lion in winter finally arrives. You look tired, Harrison." I leaned heavily on my cane, letting my mouth hang slightly open, playing the part of the confused geriatric to perfection. I shuffled to the chair Veronica pulled out for me. "I just want to go home," I mumbled, my voice cracking. You said if I came here I could keep my garden." Veronica patted my shoulder, a gesture that looked affectionate but felt like a shackle. "Of course, Dad," she said soothingly. "Just sign the papers and you can go back to your roses. We promise." Drake, the traitorous lawyer, slid the thick stack of documents across the table. It was the asset purchase agreement, the death warrant for Blackwood Logistics. "Sign on the tabbed pages," Harrison Drake said, clicking a heavy fountain pen and holding it out to me. I looked at the pen. It was a Mont Blanc. Expensive. Heavy. I looked at Preston. He was sitting across from me, wringing his hands. "Son," I whispered, "please, don't make me do this. I built this for you." Preston looked away, his face pale. "Just sign it, Dad. It is better this way." I looked at Carter. He was grinning, a predatory grin that showed all his teeth. "Go on, old man," he sneered. "Put us all out of our misery." I reached out with my right hand. My hand trembled violently. I made sure it was theatrical enough to be noticed, but realistic enough to be believed. The pen rattled against the paper. I tried to bring the nib down to the signature line, but I jerked my hand back, dropping the pen. I can't," I stammered, clutching my right wrist. "My arm. It feels numb." "The stroke." Veronica's eyes widened. She hissed at Preston. "I told you the drugs were too strong." She leaned down, whispering in my ear. "Dad, you have to sign. Use your other hand. Just make a mark. Anything." This was the moment, the pivot point. They were so desperate for the ink on the page that they forgot the rules of the game. They forgot who they were dealing with. I looked up at her, my eyes wet with fake tears. Can I use my left hand?" I asked pitifully. "Yes," Carter barked from the end of the table, impatient. "Just put your name on the damn line, Harrison. I don't care if you hold the pen with your teeth." I picked up the pen with my left hand. I am right-handed. I have been right-handed for 72 years. My right-hand signature is a thing of beauty, a sharp, aggressive scrawl that is known across the industry. But today my right hand hung limp and useless at my side. I gripped the pen awkwardly in my left fist like a child learning to write. I pressed the nib to the paper. I, Harrison Blackwood. I wrote slowly, deliberately, making the letters jagged and uneven. It looked like the writing of a broken man. It looked like the signature of someone whose mind had finally snapped. Veronica watched the tip of the pen like a hawk. As I finished the last loop of the D, She let out a breath she had been holding. She snatched the paper away before the ink was even dry. "Done," she announced triumphantly, sliding the document down to Carter. Carter looked at the signature. He laughed, a deep, booming sound of victory. "Ugly as sin," he said, "but it clears the bank." "Congratulations, Harrison. You just sold your soul." I slumped back in my chair, letting my head drop to my chest, hiding the smile that threatened to break through my facade. They didn't know. None of them knew. In 1985, when I took the company public, I wrote the corporate bylaws myself. I was paranoid back then. I was afraid of coercion, afraid of being kidnapped and forced to sign over my assets. So I buried a clause deep in Article 4, Section 12 of the company charter. It states clearly and irrevocably that for any transfer of majority ownership, the chairman's signature must be verified by a specific set of criteria. First, it must be signed with the registered dominant hand. For me, that is the right hand. Second, and more importantly, it must be witnessed and notarized by the chief legal officer of the corporation. Not an outside counsel like Drake, not a family member. The chief legal officer. My chief legal officer is Mr. Thorne, and Mr. Thorne was not in this room. By forcing me to sign with my left hand and by excluding Thorne, they had just presided over the creation of a worthless piece of paper. That contract wasn't a sale. It was evidence. It was proof of coercion, proof that I was under duress. Veronica was already pouring champagne. She handed a glass to Carter and another to Preston. To the new era, she toasted. To cash, Carter replied, clinking his glass against hers. They didn't offer me a glass. I was just the furniture now. The used-up resource. "Can I go home now?" I asked, my voice small. Veronica didn't even look at me. "In a minute, Dad," she said dismissively, checking her phone. "We just need to wait for the wire confirmation." I sat there watching them celebrate their crime. I watched Preston down his champagne in one gulp, his hands finally steadying now that he thought he was safe from the mob. I watched Veronica preen, imagining herself the queen of society with her new fortune. They thought the signature was the end. They didn't realize it was the trigger. By signing that document, I had completed the crime. Until the pen hit the paper, it was just a conspiracy. Now it was fraud. Now it was theft. Now it was a felony. I checked my watch discreetly. 2:15. Thorne would be entering the lobby right about now. He would have the certified copy of the bylaws in his briefcase. He would have the biometric logs proving I was of sound mind. And he would have company. I looked at the jagged signature on the document sitting in front of Carter. It was the ugliest thing I had ever written, and yet to me it was the most beautiful. It was a trap snapped shut. "My arm hurts," I complained again, rubbing my right shoulder. "Stop whining," Harrison Carter said, not looking up from his phone. "You are a rich man now. Go buy a new arm." I closed my eyes and let out a sigh that sounded like defeat, but was actually relief. The acting was almost over. The mask could almost come off. "You know," I said, my voice suddenly steady, losing the tremulous rasp I had faked for 24 hours. "My father always told me to read the fine print." Veronica froze. Her glass stopped halfway to her mouth. She turned slowly to look at me. The change in my tone registered instantly. "What did you say?" she asked. I sat up straight. I rolled my shoulders back, shedding the posture of the invalid. I picked up the cane, not to lean on it, but to hold it like a scepter. I said. I repeated, my voice booming with the authority of the chairman. "You should have read the bylaws, Veronica. Article 4, Section 12. Preston looked at me, his eyes widening in confusion. Dad Carter looked up, his shark eyes narrowing. "What is he talking about?" I smiled. A real cold smile. "I am talking about the fact that I am right-handed, you morons. And that piece of paper you are holding is worth less than the toilet paper in the executive washroom. Before they could react, before Veronica could scream or Carter could lunge, the heavy double doors of the boardroom burst open with a crash that shook the walls. The time for games was over. The phoenix had risen. The sound of the heavy deadbolt sliding into place echoed through the hallway like a gunshot sealing a coffin. They had moved me from my bedroom to the guest suite on the first floor, a room with reinforced windows and a heavy oak door that locked from the outside. Veronica had smiled as she took my cane away, leaving me unsteady on the plush carpet. She unplugged the landline phone and slipped it into her purse. She even took the remote for the television. Total isolation. That was her strategy. She wanted me to sit in silence and stew in my own fear until they returned victorious from the office, having stripped me of everything I owned. I listened to the sound of their departure. The front door slammed. The engine of the limousine roared to life, a deep guttural purr that faded down the long driveway. Then silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that would have broken a weaker man. But they had made a critical error. They assumed that because I was old, I was helpless. They assumed that because I built a logistics empire using computers and spreadsheets in my later years, that I had forgotten the gritty analog survival skills of my youth. I waited exactly 5 minutes to ensure they were gone. Then I moved. My limp vanished. My posture straightened. I did not need the cane. I needed a screwdriver, but a dime from my pocket would have to do. I dragged a heavy armchair over to the air conditioning vent located high on the wall near the ceiling. I climbed up, wincing as my arthritic knees protested, but ignoring the pain. Pain was just information. It told me I was still alive. I used the edge of the dime to unscrew the 4 painted screws holding the grate in place. It took effort. My fingers were stiff, but my resolve was iron. The grate came loose with a metallic clang. I reached deep into the dusty ductwork. My hand brushed against something cold and plastic. I pulled it out. It was an Iridium satellite phone. A brick of a device rugged waterproof and completely independent of the local cellular grid or the house internet. I had bought it 10 years ago after a hurricane knocked out communications at our Florida hub. I kept it fully charged and hidden for emergencies. This was an emergency. I stepped out onto the small balcony attached to the suite just to ensure a clear line of sight to the sky. I extended the thick antenna. I powered it on. The screen flickered to life, glowing with a reassuring green light. Searching for signal. 1 bar. 2 bars. Connected. I dialed a number I had memorized 2 decades ago. It was a private line that bypassed secretaries and assistants. It rang once. Twice. Harrison. The voice on the other end was gruff and alert. Mr. Thorne. My chief legal officer. My oldest friend. He did not ask how I was calling. He did not ask why I was calling. He just knew Thorne. I said, my voice low and steady. It is time. There was a pause on the line. A heavy, pregnant pause. Are you sure? Harrison Thorne asked. Once we pull this trigger, there is no putting the bullet back in the chamber. I am sure, I said, looking out over the manicured lawn that my son wanted to sell. Initiate the Phoenix Protocol. Understood, Thorne said. His tone shifted instantly from friend to general. I am accessing the secure server now. I am freezing the corporate accounts. I am locking the stock transfer agent. There is more, I said. I need you to call the Economic Crimes Unit. Get Detective Miller. Tell him I have evidence of wire fraud conspiracy and attempted murder. Tell him to meet us at the Blackwood Tower. Attempted murder, Thorne repeated the words sharp. They tried to poison me, Thorne, and when that failed, they tried to declare me incompetent. They are at the office right now with Carter from Red Rock. They are signing the asset purchase agreement at 2:00. I heard the sound of a keyboard clacking furiously in the background. I will have the FBI there too, Thorne said. Crossing state lines to commit fraud with a wire transfer makes this federal. Good, I said. And Thorne, bring the bylaws. The original 1985 leather-bound copy, and bring the biometric logs. Consider it done, Thorne said. Where are you? I am locked in the guest suite, I said, but not for long. I will meet you in the lobby at 1:55. Do not start the party without me. I ended the call and collapsed the antenna. I hid the phone in the inside pocket of my jacket. Step 1 was complete. Now for step 2. I walked to the closet. Veronica had cleared out most of my things, leaving only some pajamas and sweatpants, thinking to humiliate me further. But she had missed the garment bag pushed all the way to the back. I unzipped it. The smell of cedar and old wool drifted out. It was my charcoal gray 3-piece suit, the one I wore when I faced down the Teamsters in '92. It was out of fashion, perhaps a bit tight around the waist now, but it commanded respect. It was armor. I stripped off the comfortable cardigan and slacks they had dressed me in. I put on the crisp white shirt, fumbling only slightly with the buttons. I pulled on the trousers. I fastened the vest. I tied the red silk tie in a perfect Windsor knot, my muscle memory taking over. I looked in the mirror. The confused old man with the shuffling gait was gone. Staring back at me was Harrison Blackwood, the man who built an empire from a single truck. My eyes were cold. My jaw was set. I looked like a man going to war. I heard a soft scratching at the door, then the click of a key turning in the lock. The door handle turned slowly. Maria slipped inside, closing the door softly behind her. She held a ring of keys in her shaking hand. When she turned and saw me, she gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Dios mío," she whispered. "Mr. Harrison, you look like the boss again." I walked over to her and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I am the boss, Maria," I said, "and I always will be. Is the car ready?" See, she nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and admiration. I opened the garage side door like you asked. The security cameras are on a loop. I unplugged the server for 10 seconds, just like you taught me once. "You are a treasure, Maria," I said. She looked at my suit, then at the door. "Mr. Harrison," she said softly, "they will be angry. Mr. Preston, he has a temper now." "Mr. Preston is a child playing with matches," I said, adjusting my cuffs, "and he is about to burn his fingers." We moved into the hallway. The house was silent. Greg the nurse was gone, likely dismissed by Veronica once she thought I was secured. We walked to the kitchen and out through the service entrance that led to the garage. My main car, the Rolls-Royce, was gone, taken by Veronica. Preston's sports car was gone. But in the far corner, under a dust sheet, was my old Lincoln Town Car. It was 20 years old, built like a tank, and reliable as the sunrise. Preston hated it. He called it a dinosaur. He had tried to sell it 3 times, but I always refused. I pulled the sheet off. The black paint shone under the fluorescent lights. I opened the door and slid into the leather seat. It smelled of tobacco and memories. I put the key in the ignition. It turned over with a roar, a deep V8 rumble that sounded like thunder. Maria stood by the door, holding it open. "Go, Mr. Harrison," she said. "Go get them." I looked at her one last time. "Pack a bag." "Maria," I said, "when I come back, things are going to be very different here. You might want to take a vacation while the dust settles." I put the car in gear. The garage door opened slowly. I didn't wait for it to fully rise. I punched the accelerator and the Lincoln shot out into the sunlight. I drove down the long driveway, past the manicured hedges, past the security gate that opened automatically for my transponder. I turned onto the highway and headed toward the city. The skyline of Chicago rose in the distance, a jagged line of steel and glass. In the center of it stood the Blackwood Tower, my tower. My son was sitting in my chair, selling my legacy. He thought I was locked in a room crying. He thought I was finished. I pressed the gas pedal down. The speedometer climbed. I wasn't just driving to a meeting. I was driving toward my vindication. The Phoenix Protocol was active. The trap was set. All that was left was to spring it. While I navigated the heavy afternoon traffic pushing the old Lincoln town car toward the city limits, the scene inside the Blackwood Tower boardroom was unfolding with the tragic inevitability of a Greek tragedy. I knew exactly what was happening in that room because I had spent 40 years studying human nature, and I knew the players involved better than they knew themselves. My absence created a vacuum, and the sharks were rushing in to fill it. Inside the boardroom, the air was cold and recycled, smelling of stale coffee and expensive ambition. The room was packed to capacity. On one side of the long mahogany table sat the shareholders, a mix of nervous pension fund managers and greedy day traders who only cared about the quarterly returns. On the other side sat the executives from Red Rock, looking like a pack of wolves eyeing a wounded deer. And at the head of the table, in the heavy leather chair that had molded to my back over 3 decades, sat my son, Preston. He looked small in it. The chair was designed for a leader, and Preston was a follower. He shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his tie, sweating under the collar of his shirt, despite the chill in the room. Standing behind him, resting a manicured hand on his shoulder, was Veronica. She was the true power in the room, and she knew it. She radiated a toxic energy, a mixture of arrogance and triumph that filled the space like a noxious gas. Preston cleared his throat, tapping the microphone with a nervous finger. The sound echoed through the room, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. He looked pale, his eyes darting toward the door, as if he expected me to burst in at any moment. But when the doors remained closed, he seemed to gain a fragile sort of confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston began, his voice shaky at first, but gaining strength from Veronica's grip on his shoulder. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We have gathered here today to make a difficult but necessary announcement regarding the future of Blackwood Logistics." He paused, taking a sip of water, his hand trembling slightly. "As many of you know, my father, Harrison Blackwood, has been the heart and soul of this company for 50 years. But time comes for us all. It is with a heavy heart that I must inform you that my father has suffered a severe cognitive decline. His doctors have diagnosed him with advanced dementia, and he is no longer capable of making rational decisions or leading this organization." A ripple of shock went through the room. The loyal employees, the ones who had been with me since the days of paper logs and CB radios, looked devastated. Arthur, the vice president of operations, who had started as a forklift driver under my supervision, put his head in his hands. Sarah, the head of human resources, wiped a tear from her eye. They were mourning the man they thought they knew. Veronica stepped forward, then taking the spotlight she had craved for years. She did not look sad. She looked energized. "It is a tragedy," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "But business must go on. Harrison has signed a full transfer of authority to Preston and myself. We are now the legal guardians of both his person and his estate. And our first act as the new leadership is to secure the financial future of this company." She gestured toward Carter, the CEO of Red Rock, who was sitting at the opposite end of the table looking bored and impatient. "We have reached an agreement with Red Rock Corporation for a complete acquisition of Blackwood Logistics," Veronica announced. "This deal will provide immediate liquidity and ensure that the shareholders are protected." Arthur stood up, his face red with anger. "Acquisition?" Arthur spat. "You mean a liquidation? I have seen the preliminary terms, Veronica. You are selling us for parts. You are selling the fleet, the warehouses, the routes. You are shutting down the pension fund." Veronica laughed, a cold, sharp sound that cut through the tension. "Sit down, Arthur," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You are thinking with your heart, not your head. That is exactly why this company has stagnated. You are holding on to the past just like Harrison was." "We are not stagnating," Arthur argued. "We had our best quarter in 5 years. We are profitable. We have loyal customers. There is no reason to sell, especially not to Red Rock. Carter will fire half the staff by Monday. Carter smiled a predatory grin that showed all his teeth. Actually, Carter drawled, leaning back in his chair, it will be more like 70%. I have my own team. I don't need a bunch of sentimental old-timers cluttering up the payroll. The room erupted in whispers. The employees looked at Preston, pleading silently for him to defend them, to defend the people who had built his inheritance. But Preston just looked down at the table, refusing to meet their eyes. This is what happens when you refuse to evolve, Veronica said, her voice rising over the noise. She walked around the table, her heels clicking on the floor like gunshots. She stopped behind Arthur's chair. You are a dinosaur, Arthur, she said. You and all the other loyalists. You thought your tenure would protect you. You thought Harrison would protect you. Well, Harrison is drooling in a cup right now, and he isn't coming to save you. She looked around the room, making eye contact with every senior manager I had hired. Effective immediately, she declared. Everyone with more than 20 years of service is being offered an early retirement package. And by package, I mean 2 weeks severance and a cardboard box. If you don't like it, you can sue us. But I warn you, we have the best lawyers in the city. Drake, the corrupt lawyer, nodded from the corner, confirming the threat. This is a new era, Veronica continued, pacing the room like a tiger in a cage. We are trimming the fat. We are turning this sluggish family business into a pile of cash. And Preston and I are going to enjoy it. She turned to Preston, her eyes flashing. Tell them, Preston. Tell them about the plans. Preston looked up, his face slick with sweat. We believe this is the best path forward, he stammered. The market is volatile. Cashing out now protects the value. Protects the value, Arthur shouted. You are selling a billion-dollar company for $450 million. You are robbing the shareholders to pay for whatever desperate mess you are in. Veronica slammed her hand down on the table. That is enough, she screamed, her mask of sophistication slipping for a moment to reveal the rage beneath. Security, escort Arthur out of the building and take his badge. He is trespassing. 2 security guards, young men who didn't know the history of the company, hesitated. Do it, Veronica shrieked. Or you are fired too. The guards stepped forward reluctantly. Arthur stood up, shaking off their hands. I am leaving, he said, straightening his tie. But you mark my words, Preston. Your father would be ashamed. You are spitting on his grave while he is still alive. Get out, Veronica hissed. As Arthur walked out, the atmosphere in the room shifted from shock to fear. The remaining employees sat in terrified silence, realizing that no one was safe. Veronica was not just cleaning house, she was enjoying it. She was taking pleasure in destroying the lives of people she considered beneath her. She turned back to Carter, smoothing her skirt and composing herself. I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Carter, she said sweetly. Some people just don't know when to let go. Carter chuckled, checking his watch. I don't care about your personnel drama, Veronica Carter said. I just care about the ink. I have a wire transfer pending for $450 million. But I need signatures. Real signatures. Not promises. We are ready, Veronica said. She gestured to Drake, who placed the final copies of the sale agreement in front of Preston and Carter. The document was thick, binding, and irreversible. Once signed, Blackwood Logistics would cease to exist as an independent entity. The trucks would be repainted. The warehouses would be sold. The legacy would be erased. Preston picked up the pen. It was a gold Mont Blanc, a gift I had given him when he graduated college. He held it in his shaking hand, staring at the signature line. Do it, Veronica whispered, leaning into his ear. Sign it, and the debt is gone. Sign it, and we are free. Sign it, and we own the world. Preston looked at the paper. He looked at the terrified faces of the employees. He looked at the smug face of Carter. And then he looked at Veronica. I need a drink, he muttered. Sign first. Drink later. Carter barked. I have a tea time at 4. Veronica placed her hand over Preston's hand, guiding the pen to the paper. Just sign your name, she hissed. It is just a signature, Preston. Don't be a coward. Preston took a deep breath. The nib of the pen hovered millimeters above the paper. The entire room held its breath. The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the beat of a heart, the scratch of a shoe on the carpet. This was the moment of victory for the villains. They had won. They had neutralized the old man, crushed the loyalists, and secured the fortune. They were seconds away from the finish line, basking in their own hubris, believing they were untouchable gods of their own making. Veronica smiled a wide, predatory smile, watching the pen touch the paper. That is it, she whispered. Write it. Preston began to write the first letter of his name. The ink flowed black and permanent. The loop of the P formed on the page. And that was when the heavy double doors at the end of the room, which had been locked and guarded, and suddenly exploded inward with a crash that sounded like thunder. The doors slammed against the walls with a violence that made the crystal water pitchers rattle. All heads turned instantly. Preston dropped the pen. It clattered across the table, rolling over the contract he was seconds away from signing. Veronica spun around, her mouth open in a perfect O of shock. Carter looked annoyed, then confused, then wary. I walked in. I did not shuffle. I did not drag my feet. I walked with the stride of a man who has walked 20 miles in snow to fix a broken axle. I walked with the rhythm of the road in my veins. I was wearing my charcoal suit, the one that fit like armor. My red tie was a slash of blood against the white shirt. I held my cane not for support, but like a weapon, carrying it by the middle. Behind me walked Mr. Thorne, clutching a briefcase that contained their doom. Flanking him were 2 uniformed officers and Detective Miller from the Economic Crimes Unit, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a held breath. Dad, Preston whispered. His face went gray, the color of old ash. How are you here? You are supposed to be... In bed, I finished for him, my voice booming across the room, drooling, confused, waiting for the nice men in the white coats to take me away. Is that it, son? I reached the head of the table. I looked at the empty chair where Preston sat. He scrambled out of it, nearly tripping over his own feet, terrified by the sheer physical presence of my rage. I did not sit down. I stood there, looming over them all. This meeting is adjourned, I said, and this sale is void. Veronica recovered first. She was a fighter, I had to give her that. She stepped forward, her face twisting from shock into a mask of indignation. Security, she shrieked, pointing at me. Get him out of here. He is having a psychotic break. He is dangerous. He escaped from his nurse. The security guards looked at me. Then they looked at the police officers standing behind me. They wisely decided to inspect their shoes. I am not the one who is dangerous, Veronica, I said calmly. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the thick stack of documents Thorne had prepared. I tossed them onto the center of the table. They landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the polished wood until they hit Carter's water glass. Mr. Thorne, step forward, please. Thorne walked up to the table. He adjusted his glasses, looking at Drake, the corrupt lawyer, with a mixture of pity and disgust. According to Article 4, Section 12 of the Blackwood Logistics Corporate Charter, Thorne announced, his voice dry and legalistic, any transfer of majority ownership requires the chairman's signature to be executed with his registered dominant hand. Thorne picked up the document I had signed earlier, the one Veronica thought was her golden ticket. He held it up for the room to see. As you can clearly see, this document was signed with the left hand. Mr. Blackwood has been right-handed since birth. Therefore, under the bylaws, this document is not a legal instrument. It is scrap paper. Veronica laughed. It was a high-pitched, hysterical sound. You are kidding me, she spat. A technicality. That is your big play. He signed it. We all saw him sign it. The intent was there. Any judge will uphold it, especially since he is mentally incompetent. Ah, yes, Thorne said, smiling thin and sharp. The incompetence. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a fresh file. He slid it toward Carter. This is a forensic medical report completed 1 hour ago by an independent state psychiatrist and a toxicologist. It certifies that Harrison Blackwood is of sound mind, fully oriented, and possessing an IQ higher than everyone else at this table combined. Thorne paused, letting that sink in. It also certifies that his blood contains trace amounts of scopolamine and digitalis, poisons that were introduced into his system yesterday. The room gasped. A collective intake of breath from the shareholders. Carter picked up the report, scanning it quickly. His face darkened. He looked at Preston, then at Veronica. You told me it was dementia, Carter growled. You didn't tell me you drugged him. We didn't, Veronica yelled, desperate now. He is lying. He poisoned himself. He is trying to frame us because he is paranoid. Paranoid, I said quietly. I walked over to the wall where the control panel for the audiovisual system was mounted. I didn't need a remote. I knew this system because I installed it. I pressed the button to lower the main projection screen. Let's see just how paranoid I am. I plugged my phone into the console. The screen flickered to life. First I played the audio. The quality was crystal clear, recorded by the spider device I had hidden under the coffee table. Veronica's voice filled the room, amplified by the surround sound speakers. If he hesitates for 1 second, I have the syringe ready. It is in my purse. 1 injection and his heart stops, and I will make it look like he died in his sleep. The color drained from Veronica's face so fast she looked like a corpse. She staggered back, clutching the edge of the table. The shareholders looked at her with horror. Preston put his hands over his ears, as if he could block out the sound of his own complicity. Then Preston's voice played. We get the signature, and we put him in a home. We are not killing my father. And Veronica's reply, the slap echoing through the speakers. You are a useless coward, Preston. I am the one doing the dirty work. I stopped the audio. The room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. I looked at Veronica. Dirty work, I said. Like this. I swiped the screen. The video played. It was grainy, taken from the camera I had hidden in the kitchen vent years ago, but the image was unmistakable. It showed Veronica standing at the counter. It showed her taking a bottle of pills from her purse. It showed her crushing them. It showed her dancing, humming a little tune as she stirred the powder into my coffee cup. I paused the video on the frame, where she smiled at the poisoned cup. I turned to face the room. That is my daughter-in-law, I said, my voice cold as liquid nitrogen. Preparing my breakfast. Carter stood up. He shoved his chair back so hard it tipped over. He looked at the contract on the table, then at Preston. I am out, he said. The deal is off. I don't do business with murderers. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw respect in his eyes. You played me, Harrison, Carter said. You played us all. I didn't play you, Carter, I said. I just let you see who you were really getting into bed with. Now get out of my building before I have you arrested for conspiracy. Carter didn't argue. He gathered his team and marched out, leaving the treacherous duo alone in the center of the storm. Veronica stood frozen, staring at the screen. The evidence was irrefutable. Her arrogance, her hubris had been stripped away, leaving only the naked reality of her crimes. She looked at me, and her eyes were not defiant anymore. They were terrified. And Preston, my son. He was weeping. Not the fake tears from the hospital. These were the tears of a man who realizes he has burned his life to the ground, and there is no insurance to cover the damage. Detective Miller stepped forward. The jingle of handcuffs was the only sound in the room. Veronica Blackwood. He said, his voice flat, and professional. You are under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and wire fraud. Veronica screamed. It was a raw, primal sound. She lunged toward me, her hands clawed into talons. You old bastard, she shrieked. You ruined everything. You should have just died. She didn't get far. 2 officers grabbed her, forcing her arms behind her back. She thrashed and kicked, cursing me, cursing Preston, cursing the world. But the handcuffs clicked shut, the steel biting into her wrists. Preston stood up slowly. He held his hands out to the detective, surrendering without a fight. He couldn't even look at me. Dad, he whispered. I am sorry. I looked at him. I looked at the boy. I had raised the man who had stood by while his wife planned my death. I felt a pain in my chest that no medicine could fix. But I pushed it down. I locked it away in the same place I kept my fear and my doubt. I am sorry too, Preston, I said. I am sorry I didn't teach you that integrity is the only currency that matters. I turned my back on them. I watched the reflection in the window as the police led them away. My son and his wife marching out of my life and into a prison cell. The room erupted into chaos behind me, shareholders shouting questions, reporters who had snuck in flashing cameras. But I didn't turn around. I stared out at the city, at the empire I had built and saved. It was mine again. Totally and completely mine. But as I stood there, surrounded by victory, I had never felt more alone. The king had returned to his throne, but the castle was empty. The officers began to drag Veronica toward the exit, and that was when the last facade of her sanity crumbled completely. She did not go quietly. She fought with the desperation of a cornered rat, kicking and thrashing against the grip of the law. Her perfectly coiffed hair came undone, falling in wild strands across her face. Her eyes, usually so cold and calculated, were now wide and manic, burning with a fire that had nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with madness. You old bastard, she screamed, her voice tearing at her throat. You should have just died. Why didn't you just die? We deserved it. We earned it waiting on you hand and foot for 10 years. I watched her with a stoic detachment. She was not shouting at me, really. She was shouting at her own failure. She was shouting at the universe for daring to deny her what she believed was her birthright. As they pushed her through the double doors, she twisted her head back for one last venomous look. You will be alone, she shrieked, the sound echoing down the hallway even after the doors swung shut. You will rot in this tower with your money, Harrison. No one loves you. No one. The silence that followed her exit was heavy and suffocating. The shareholders looked at the floor, uncomfortable, with the raw, naked display of greed and hatred they had just witnessed. But I was not looking at the shareholders. I was looking down. Preston was still there. My son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man I had entrusted with my legacy. He had watched his wife be arrested, and he had not moved a muscle to help her. He had not said a word in her defense. He was trembling, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. When he realized that Veronica was gone, that his shield and his mastermind had been stripped away, he collapsed. It was not a graceful fall. He simply dissolved, sinking to his knees on the plush carpet of the boardroom. He crawled toward me, his expensive suit pants dragging on the floor, his dignity abandoned completely. He reached out and grabbed the leg of my trousers, burying his face against my knee. Dad, he sobbed, his voice muffled by the fabric of my suit. Dad, please, you have to help me. I didn't want to do it. She made me. She said it was the only way. I was scared, Dad. I was so scared. I looked down at the top of his head. I saw the thinning hair, the sweat on his neck. I waited for a surge of paternal instinct. I waited for the urge to reach down and pat his shoulder, to tell him that everything would be all right, that Daddy would fix it. But the urge did not come. The well was dry. I reached down not to comfort him, but to remove him. I peeled his fingers off my leg one by one. His grip was weak, clammy, and desperate. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between us that mirrored the emotional chasm that had opened up over the last 24 hours. "Stand up, Preston," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Have some dignity for once in your life." He scrambled to his feet, wiping his nose with the back of his hand, looking at me with wide, pleading eyes. "Dad, the debt," he whispered so the police wouldn't hear. "The syndicate. The deadline is midnight. If I don't pay them $15 million, they said they would kill me. You can't let them kill me. Just unfreeze the trust fund. Please. I will go away. I will never ask for anything again. Just save me this one last time." I looked at him and I saw the truth. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He wasn't sorry he tried to steal the company. He wasn't even sorry about the poison. He was just terrified of the consequences. He wanted me to be the safety net he had relied on his entire life. I leaned on my cane, staring him straight in the eye. "I am not your safety net anymore, Preston," I said. "I am the man you tried to declare incompetent. I am the man you were willing to sell to a slaughterhouse." "But I am your son," he wailed. I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "My son died the moment he watched his wife pour poison into my cup and said nothing. My son died when he signed a contract to dismantle my life's work. You are not my son. You are a stranger who broke into my house." I signaled to Mr. Thorne. Thorne stepped forward holding a tablet. "Your personal accounts have been frozen pending the investigation into the fraud," Thorne said calmly. "Your credit cards have been canceled. Your access to the company buildings has been revoked, effective immediately." Preston looked from Thorne to me, his face draining of blood. "But the money," he stammered. "The 15 million. "I suggest you start running," I said coldly. "Or go to the police and beg for protective custody. Tell them about your gambling. Tell them about the syndicate. Maybe a prison cell is the safest place for you right now. But do not look to me. The Bank of Harrison Blackwood is closed permanently. Officer, remove him." Preston opened his mouth to scream, to beg, to bargain, but the two officers stepped in, one on each side. They took him by the arms. He went limp, his legs dragging as they hauled him out of the room. He didn't fight like Veronica. He just wept, a broken, pathetic sound that faded as they dragged him down the corridor. I stood there alone at the head of the table. The room was empty of family now. Only the lawyers and the police remained. I looked at the contract on the table, the one with the jagged left-handed signature. I picked it up and slowly, deliberately tore it in half. Then I tore it again. "It is done," I said to the room at large. The drive back to the estate was long and quiet. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the highway. I sat in the back of the Lincoln watching the city pass by. I felt lighter, as if a heavy tumor had been cut from my body, but I also felt the phantom pain of the amputation. I had saved the empire, but I had lost the heir. When the car pulled up to the manor, the house looked different. It looked bigger, emptier. The lights were on in the kitchen, warm and inviting against the dusk. I walked inside. The house was silent. No Greg the nurse watching football. No Veronica plotting in the study. No Preston pacing the halls. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. I walked into the kitchen. Maria was there, standing by the sink. She had packed a small suitcase just as I had asked. It was sitting by the back door. When she saw me, she wiped her hands on her apron and looked at me with anxious eyes. "Mr. Harrison," she asked softly, "is it over?" "It is over, Maria," I said. "They are gone. They won't be coming back." She let out a breath and crossed herself, muttering a prayer in Spanish. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. I pulled out an envelope. It contained a check for $2 million drawn from my personal private account, one that Veronica had never touched. I walked over to her and held it out. "This is for you," I said. She took it, looking at the number. Her hands started to shake. She looked up at me, tears filling her eyes. "Mr. Harrison, this is too much. I cannot accept this." "I just did what was right." "You saved my life, Maria," I said. "And more importantly, you were loyal when my own blood was not. You are the only person in this world I trust. Take it. Go to Florida. Buy a house near your daughter. Be a grandmother. Don't spend the rest of your life cleaning up other people's messes." She grabbed my hand and kissed it, weeping openly. "Thank you, patron. Thank you. But what about you? Who will take care of you?" I smiled a sad, tired smile. "I will take care of myself, Maria. I have been doing it for 70 years. I think I can manage a little longer." I sent her off in a taxi to the airport, watching the taillights fade into the night. Then I was truly alone. I walked back into the kitchen. I didn't call a chef. I didn't call a servant. I opened the cupboard and took out the bag of beans. I poured them into the grinder. The noise was loud in the empty house, a mechanical roar that filled the silence. I smelled the rich aroma of the coffee. I boiled the water. I pressed the grounds. I poured the black liquid into my favorite mug, the one Veronica had tried to use as a murder weapon. I took it out to the balcony off the master bedroom. The night air was crisp and cold. Below me, the city of Chicago sprawled out like a sea of diamonds, a billion lights shining in the darkness. Somewhere down there in a cold cell, my son and daughter-in-law were realizing that actions have consequences. Somewhere down there, the trucks of Blackwood Logistics were rolling down the highway, carrying goods, keeping the world moving, my name painted on the side of every trailer. I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and hot and clean. It tasted like survival. I was 72 years old. I had no wife. I had no son. I had no daughter-in-law. I was the last Blackwood standing in the castle I had built. The wind blew, rattling the leaves of the oak trees in the garden. It was lonely up here at the top, but as I looked out at the horizon, I realized something else. I was safe. I was free. And the empire was still standing. I raised my cup to the moon in a silent toast to the empty house. To the future, I whispered, whatever is left of it. I drank the coffee, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what the morning would bring. Harrison Blackwood teaches us a painful lesson about the true meaning of family. Blood is biology, but loyalty is a choice. Sometimes the people we sacrifice everything for are the ones holding the knife, while a stranger like Maria becomes our only shield. The story reminds us that setting boundaries is not an act of hate, but an act of self-preservation. It takes immense courage to cut off a toxic child, to choose dignity over a false peace. Being alone at the top is better than being surrounded by vultures. Trust actions, not words, and never let your guard down. Do you think Harrison was too harsh on his son, or did Preston deserve to be disowned? What would you do if you found out your family was plotting against you? Let me know in the comments below. Please like and subscribe for more stories of justice and redemption.